Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content.
Nancy Wake sits in the train car, purse in her lap, hands folded, watching the countryside in the south of France go by. She's trying to act normal. The message arrives: the Germans are on the way. Somehow, the Gestapo have found her trail. Out of the corner of her eye, she sees the car doors start to open. She demurely, yet quickly, gets up and exits the car at the other end. But the Gestapo guys have clocked her. She makes her way, less demurely now, through car after car, Gestapo police in pursuit. She reaches the end of the train. Does Nancy Wake turn and face the Gestapo? Not right now. Nancy Wake opens the train door and jumps. She runs for cover amongst the trees. She hears shouting and gunshots. Nancy Wake, aka the White Mouse, #1 on the Gestapo's most wanted list, is on the run.
Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am joined once again by my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. And Pat, we were talking before the show opened, and you've been telling me that it's cold in Boston.
It is very cold. Yes, it is very cold. We had snow. Yes. You want to bundle up, throw on your parkas, your anoraks, your balaclavas,
Yes.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember there was one time I took the bus home from Boston. I was working at Boston University, and I took the bus home, took the D line to the end, and I had to get to my house, and it was like Friday, and it was so cold I couldn't feel my hands. And the sidewalk was blocked by like this mountain of snow that I had to climb over, like hands and feet climb over, like climb a hill to get up over this bypass of snow in the walkway so that I could get into my apartment and just be done with the week. And I just remember being like, this is so cold. I'm not going to make it. I felt like I was summiting Everest,
Yeah.
So that's mid-January in Boston, but
in
I'm not
the Southern
in Boston.
Hemisphere.
Yes, I am in Brazil currently as I record this.
Lucky you.
Yes, with my wife and her family. And it's not like that. And it's actually very funny because, I still have, anytime you boot up a video game on your phone or go to some website or something, everything's all snow themed, the loading screens are snow themed. And, down here, it's the height of summer in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's hot and it's sweaty and it's, it's very funny to open up a thing and see all the snow stuff. I went over last weekend to Foz do Iguaçu, which is like the big waterfall at the border of Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. And this is like this insane series of waterfalls. It's like nothing I've ever seen in the world, including Niagara Falls and all that, right? This is completely unique, just a rainforest full of waterfalls, each of which is gigantic. And they all come together. It's amazing. But it was like 95 degrees 3 days straight, and no rain, no nothing, just sweltering heat. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. We are talking, however, about somebody else who comes from the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes.
How's that for a transition?
Excellent transition. Yes. Yeah.
We are going to talk about a woman from New Zealand, Australia, born in New Zealand, raised in Australia, who was not only like possibly the most badass spy of World War II, but was for sure the most decorated woman in the Allied side from World War II. We've talked about Virginia Hall as being like a badass spy. She was the most decorated American woman of the war. But Nancy Wake is going to be a a wild ride of a story. A woman born in New Zealand who ends up in Paris fighting Nazis with the French resistance. Just the kind of woman that would be right at home, as with all of the badasses we've talked about, just hard fighting, hard drinking, special agent, saboteur, resistance commander. She was interrogated by the Gestapo for 4 days and they couldn't break her. She saved something like 200 Allied pilots from, who had been shot down over France. She helped them escape. As a resistance fighter, she fought the Germans. She blew up supply depots. At one point, there was a bounty of 5 million francs on her head. And there is a story, and at least as written in her autobiography, there is a story that she literally single-handedly killed a German spy by judo chopping him in the throat with her bare hands. Which,
well,
whether that's true or not, I love it.
It's a good story.
That's going in. That's going into the final product of this episode.
Yeah.
So, Nancy Wake, we are going to take a really quick break. We're going to talk about the most badass woman Allied spy of World War II, and I guess I like to go into these ad breaks with a quote, and the quote from Nancy Wake is, "I don't see why we women should just wave our men a proud goodbye and then knit them balaclavas."
Now, to be fair, here in New England this week, you need balaclavas, but sounds like she really just didn't want to sit around and knit.
Yes.
She had other things to do.
Although balaclavas are pretty bad. A balaclava is it's the ski mask, right? Like a guy holding up a bank with the 3 holes cut in the mask.
Yeah,
That's a balaclava, or a ninja mask. That's a balaclava.
Yeah, it's like a hat with like an instant full face scarf attached to it, kind of. Yeah.
So you can
a knitted
ninja mask. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, there you go.
You
Yeah,
knit one of those. That's pretty cool.
Knit one of those, put it on, and go out and do more badass things.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Nancy Wake. Stick with us. Nancy Wake was born in New Zealand in 1912, but her family moved to Australia when she was only 2 years old. Now, not long after that, her father left the family, leaving Nancy and her mom and her 5 brothers and sisters and going back to New Zealand, but she stayed in Australia with the rest of her family. She grew up, the family didn't have very much money or property or anything like that. And so at age 16, Nancy leaves home to go and work as a nurse in Sydney, Australia. She does that for a couple of years. And then at 20, she moves to London, England. She has about $300 in her pocket, which went a lot farther in 1922 or 32 than it does now. But she had $300 in her pocket, which is still not a lot of money. And she went to London to try to make a new life for herself. She, over the next 2 years, is in London. She ends up in Paris, and she's got a job as a freelance newspaper journalist during the day. And at night, she's kind of fallen into the club scene in Paris. She likes to go out. She likes to have a good time. She likes to party. She likes to talk to people. She's good at getting information from people and talking to them and getting people to like her, which is a thing that is going to be extremely valuable in her career as a spy later on in life. But at 22 in Paris, she's just kind of having a good time.
And probably learning a lot of French.
Yeah, she speaks fluent French, English, obviously. She's learning German. And she gets this kind of reputation for going to these clubs, drinking hard, telling a bunch of dirty jokes, and then somebody else pays the bill. Great. Hey. This works. So, freelance newspaper journalist, but she's getting some good gigs, right? She doesn't work for the newspaper, but she is getting some good jobs. And one of the jobs she gets in 1933 is the newspaper she works for sends her to Vienna to do a story on this guy who has just been elected the Chancellor of Germany. His name.
Some guy.
Some dude. In 1933, some guy just got elected the Chancellor of Germany. It's kind of interesting.
Okay, what's his name again?
Oh, it's Adolf Hitler. It's Adolf Hitler. Okay, we're going to go interview
boss,
this guy.
I'll go write an article about this guy. Okay.
Yeah. She's got to travel to Vienna to meet him. And she does. She goes there and she interviews him. which is really just fascinating, right? That she goes to Austria, she interviews Hitler. He gives her the official party line on everything.
Of course he does.
Right. Well, we know, we know Hitler now for what he is, but at the time, I mean, he was a politician and he was good at telling people he was good at telling people what they wanted to hear, and he gave her the very diplomatic politician answer to the things. And as he's doing this, she's going out in Vienna, and and she's passing through Germany on the trains and stuff, and she's going out at night, and she's seeing the version that he's telling her is not the same as what she's seeing on the street. She's going on the street, she's seeing violence being done by supporters of this guy. And she sees that and she's like, I see what's happening in Austria. I see what's happening in Germany. Like, it's becoming kind of violent. It's becoming kind of dangerous. Something's weird here and I don't like it. Okay. Yeah, and the story that she comes up with is not really that flattering to this guy. So let's flash forward 7 years or so, and Adolf Hitler is now in charge of the army that is invading France. The Blitzkrieg comes to France in 1940, and by this point, Nancy Wake has settled down a little bit. She was like a party person in her 20s, which I think a lot of us were. And by 1940, she's married to a guy named Henri Fiocca. I don't know how you would pronounce
Fiocca,
this.
yeah.
Fiocca. He's like a millionaire French industrialist. So, like I said, people were picking up the tab for her drinks, and man, this is a good land. So he's a millionaire French industrialist. They're married. They've been married for a couple of years, and
and they're respected socialites. They've got very high standing in society, and
that's the thing.
Yeah,
she's not just like she has become the wife of this millionaire industrialist,
important guy.
And they have fancy social parties now. They don't go out to the jazz clubs. They're having people come to their house, to their estate to have nice dinners and stuff.
The party comes to them.
Yes, exactly. I feel like everywhere that Nancy Wake went was probably a party. I get that impression from her, reading the stories about her. So, 1940, Germany invades France, and she's living in Paris at the time, which puts her kind of in the middle of in the sights here. And so her husband is called up into service to try to help out in whatever way he can, and she's like, "Well, I'm going to help too. I got to do something." She's not French, but she's now a daughter of France, and she wants to go help the cause. Yeah. So she signs up to work as a nurse, and she gets assigned to the Belgian front. Belgium was neutral when the war began. Germany said, "I don't care." And, the French had built up this Maginot Line, this big line of trenches and things between France and Germany. Germany was like, "Well, we don't have to fight that if we just go through Belgium, who was neutral, and we just disrespect their neutrality. We can drive through this forest and capture France," which is what they did. And Nancy Wake is driving, she finds herself pressed into service driving an ambulance during the invasion of Belgium. So she's trying to help French soldiers who are fighting in Belgian soldiers. The war goes really badly, obviously, for France. And by the end of the Battle of France, Nancy Wake has found herself at Dunkirk. So, France surrenders, but the British and the Commonwealth troops, the Aussies, the New Zealanders, her people, right? They've all fallen back to Dunkirk. They're trying to evacuate back to England. She finds herself in the Dunkirk pocket, and she's using the ambulance truck to ferry British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers to evacuation points, picking them up at the battlefield, taking them to evacuation points at Dunkirk, and trying to get them out of the country so that they can live to fight another day. Okay. Now,
she's getting a bunch of British, Aussie, and New Zealand soldiers out. She's evacuating them. What about her?
She stays. She stays behind in France. She's got an estate there. She's married to a Frenchman.
That's true,
She lives outside Paris at this probably very, very nice house. And she refuses to evacuate with the rest of the Commonwealth troops. So she stays behind, and she's in Paris when Paris falls and the Nazis march in, and the Germans march their armies underneath the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, which is just like this.
So she's seeing this happen right in front of her eyes.
Yes, and she loves Paris. Right? She grew up there.
Yeah.
She spent 7 or 8 years of her life there. You know, probably the best years of her life, because it sounds like her life in New Zealand and Australia was pretty hard. So, you know, this is humiliating for France, and she's not happy about it. Okay, so what is to be done here? So the war, you know, France surrenders, and the French government is replaced with a Nazi sympathizing government, the Vichy French government. But there is resistance throughout France to the Germans. Now, armed resistance is difficult because, you know, saying "Vive la France" is a thing that will get you killed if you live under the Nazi regime in France right now. So she's not on board with Hitler and the Nazis and what they're doing, but she wants to try to do what she can to help. And one of the ways that she finds herself being able to help is that the Allies are flying air missions over France at this time. They're trying to attack German bases. They're trying to attack German shipping, rail lines, supply depots, things like that. So Royal Air Force, like British Air Force bombers and fighters, are doing missions over France. And some of these guys get shot down. Some of these pilots will get shot down. And, you know, if the pilots live, they parachute out or they survive the crash.
Yeah.
One of the things
what
that
happens
the French,
to them? Yeah.
Right. One of the things, now they're in enemy territory, right? But one of the ways the French were able to help was by getting to that British pilot before the Germans do and getting them to safety.
Getting to safety, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that they can do that is that Nancy Wake is rich and she can buy a apartment or a safe house or something for these guys to stay at, which is what she does. She gets a couple of properties and she uses them. And then she starts like kind of going out on some of these missions herself to kind of like find these pilots, but get them. But she's coordinating these safe houses where Allied fighter and bomber pilots who've been shot down over France can show up at these safe houses. They can lay low for a little while. They can get some fake paperwork forged that will help them get into Spain or get across the channel, get back to England so they can keep fighting.
And she's got properties. This is not just in Paris, because she's got a property in Marseille, for example, in another part of the country.
Yes, exactly. And so she can give this guy, like this pilot gets shot down over Paris, and yes, okay, the Spitfire is destroyed, or the B-24 is destroyed, or the Lancaster, or whatever. Like the airplane is destroyed, but this pilot is extremely valuable because he has very specialized training and experience and knowledge. Like he is a very valuable asset, and if the Germans get him, they're going to put him in a prison camp, and that's the end of the war for this guy. But if she can find this person, bring him to her safe house, get them some fake paperwork, give them some cash, you know, and then lead them on this network. And she kind of falls in with this group that specializes in this. It's kind of this railroad of people who are able to ferry from one safe house to the next. And she falls into this group and is able to start ferrying pilots out of the country, which is really cool. And that's like kind of the beginning of literally the very beginning of what we know today in the history books as the French Resistance.
Yeah. And we call it the French Resistance. It makes it sound like we've got this monolithic label for a coordinated entity. But, okay, we call them the French Resistance. They sometimes call themselves the Maquis, which is actually from the French word for underbrush, which makes it, I think, is actually a little more illustrative.
Underbrush. I didn't know that before.
Yeah. And so they're scrappy. They're kind of hiding around. And these are the French resistance fighters. And in Deep Space Nine, you've got the Maquis. But I think the writers named them after the French resistance, you know.
There might have been some influence there.
I think so. So the French resistance, or La Résistance, wasn't some big overarching organized thing. And it's just a catch-all term for the random groups of people who, one way or another, opposed the Nazis. And so some of them were honestly kind of like bandits. And some of them were very efficient, patriotic Frenchmen on a mission. And as you can imagine, they didn't always communicate well with one another. They didn't always get along with one another.
Yeah. It was like a group of people who were like, I don't like this. Like, how can I help? What can I do? But there is not like a coordinated command structure. I mean, and there were there were elements that did have coordinated command structures, but there were elements that did not, and there were elements that were like, I'm not going to listen to you. You're not the boss of me. Blah, 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 whatever. So like there was some debate between, and some of them just didn't communicate with each other because it was dangerous to have communication at that level.
It was,
at some point. And we talked about this with Virginia Hall, where like the Germans had a very strong counterintelligence that was good at intercepting radio broadcasts and things like that. And these teams, these resistance cells are operating in enemy territory, and they are always aware that their next door neighbor could be secretly a Gestapo agent, or that like, there is like a radar jammer happening around, or there is somebody's listening to their radio communications, or, it's very dangerous. And if you get caught, they're just gonna execute you. They're not gonna give you a fair trial. You're just gonna get shot in the head, and that's the end of your story. Really dangerous stuff. But yeah, like you said, it's not one group. It was a million groups.
No. Yeah. And sometimes you do have things that required a little more organization. Like there was, in fact, a mass uprising in the Paris streets, and that managed to kick out the Nazis as the Allies reached the outskirts of the city. But, many of these groups recognized Charles de Gaulle as their leader, and a lot of them were funded through the British Special Operations Executive, the SOE. And we may never know the true number of resistance fighters, but, at least from the Germans' point of view, during the war, the Germans ordered the death, deportation, and torture of about 90,000 men and women that they suspected to be of this type.
Yeah.
Working against them.
Like many people were arrested or bad things happened to these people, but 90,000 is a lot of people. Those are suspected resistance agents. Forget about the ones that were actually. And the population of France at this time is millions of people, tens of millions of people, most of whom were not happy with being occupied. But there's not much you can do about it when the SS is, taken over for your local police force. It makes your life really hard to be a resistance fighter. And so, but this is what Nancy Wake's doing, right?
Yeah. And she gets involved and she uses her Nancy Wake skills, and she's totally motivated to do this. And she actually becomes a high-level Maquis agent. So she is in charge of acquiring and distributing arms, ammo, communications equipment. And this is for a faction of about maybe 7,000 French resistance fighters.
Which is that's a big group.
It's a big
7,000 is a big cell. Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah. And her operation became such a major pain in Germany's neck. She was really like throwing a wrench in their operations. They put a 5 million franc reward out on her head.
Right. Which is a lot of money. It's significant. That is enough to make like your next door neighbor who's on the fence about whether he likes this new regime change his mind.
Yeah.
Or even like people who have like professed for the resistance be like, oh, 5 million francs, actually, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. And at one point, she was actually on the top of the Gestapo's most wanted list, which is, it's like an extra bright red target on her back.
Yeah, public enemy number one.
Yeah. Except she wasn't on their list as Nancy Wake. She was only there. They didn't know her real name. They called her the White Mouse.
Ooh.
Which sounds kind of unintimidating. A mouse, I don't know.
I guess that's true. It's not the like, it's not the white tiger. It's
yeah, but they named her after a pest who seemed to be impossible to eradicate.
Damn mouse.
Yeah.
Damn mouse keeps nibbling these wires.
And the Gestapo.
So we should talk about the Gestapo, because you and me probably know what that means, but let's not assume that because the Gestapo is They're serious.
Let's make it clear what Nancy Wake is up against.
Is up against, yes. I think that's important. She's in this French resistance, but they have their work cut out for them, and they have a very dangerous enemy that they're dealing with right now.
Yeah. So the Gestapo, it's the Nazi Party's secret police, and they have carte blanche to do pretty much whatever they wanted, pretty much however they wanted.
Yeah. Like there was a police force. There was a German police force. Even in occupied France, there was the regular police, and there's the army, and then there's the Gestapo, which is they are the police arm of the Nazi Party specifically, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the SS of cops, and they're dangerous, and if they decide that you are an enemy of Germany, then you are an enemy of Germany.
Yeah.
And
they didn't need to get a warrant or anything. They could just bypass courts. They could bypass the regular police system. They could just go ahead and kidnap you if they suspected you of, well, what were the things they didn't like?
There was a big list.
Big list. Communists, Jews, resistance agents, political enemies, and anyone else who just didn't seem to be vibing with the powers that be.
Yes. And so, like you said, 90,000 people, the Gestapo ends up questioning and detaining and in some cases executing and torturing and deporting. That's a lot of people. And each major city in Paris has a Gestapo office or each major city in France has a Gestapo office that is in charge of finding enemies of the new regime and hunting them down. And public enemy number one for these guys is the White Mouse. And okay. So she's at the top of their list. Yes. And Nancy Wake has been at this point, she has been fighting. So we're getting into 1943 now, and France has been occupied for 3 years, but she's been kind of an opponent of this political party for 10 years. She wrote that article about Hitler in 1933 and was not very favorable for him. Yeah. And then in 1940, she was driving an ambulance against him. She was evacuating soldiers at Dunkirk in 1940. And then for the last 3 years in occupied France, she has been helping pilots escape. She has been distributing weapons and armor. So she ends up getting in touch with this SOE, the Special Operations Executive, and she can communicate with them by radio. And we get sort of a thing with like we had with Virginia Hall, where okay, she'll radio them hey, I got this pilot. He's going to go out this way on this date. You need to have people here at this place waiting to pick him up. They'll write her back or radio her back. Okay, we're going to parachute in weapons to this coordinates at this time. You need to have somebody there to pick him up. So she coordinates that, getting somebody to pick up those weapons and then distributing them to those 7,000 French resistance that are in her particular cell. Nancy Wake, using her people skills, which are very strong. She's very good at talking to people. Everybody that meets her is very impressed by her. She has this huge personality. She was described by a woman who we're going to talk about in a little bit, but she's her name was Vera Atkins. She was a head. She was a very senior woman at the Special Operations Executive. The idea that Judi Dench's M is kind of based slightly off of the woman who ran MI6 in the 80s, but also partly off of this woman, Vera Atkins. That gives you an idea of how I like to envision Vera Atkins as just tough, but she's she describes Nancy Wake as an Australian bombshell, right? She just brought the party everywhere she went was everybody liked her. And so she's good at talking to people, good at getting what she wants from people. And she's super rich, which also really helps when you're trying to buy things and help people and throw your weight around in that way. And so for 3 years, she's been helping the Allies fight the Nazis from the inside, and she becomes this White Mouse. She assumes this White Mouse identity, and the Gestapo are trying to get her. Okay, so by 1943, they think they might have it figured out, not who the White Mouse is, but where she is. And they start to kind of close the noose around her. They're going to try to find her and get her, and if they get her, that's it, right? So she's been working with the SOE, and the SOE have been doing counter spy stuff. So they've been trying to intercept Gestapo radio communications, and they get word that kind of late in the game that the Gestapo know generally where the White Mouse is, and they're going to go get her. And so they radio Nancy Wake, and they're like, look, get out, go run right now. And I imagine this coming through over like Morse code, like, get out, run away right now, and she's kind of transcribing the letters one by one and being like, whoa, okay, I gotta go.
U-N-S.
Yes.
O-R-I-T. Okay. So she grabs her go bag. She hightails it out of whatever little house she's hiding in or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then which way does she go?
She's going for the Pyrenees. Because she knows that this is the railroad, right? This is where the pilots escape. This is where she's going to escape. She's going to go to the Pyrenees. She's going to cross the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, which is neutral at the time. But there's a British embassy there. If she gets into that British embassy, they'll take her back to England. Okay. So she starts to make a break for it. She gets spotted by the SS while she is riding. She gets on a train for the Pyrenees. And at some point, there are some Gestapo agents on the train that spot her. And for whatever reason, they're like, that we need to question her. She might be the one that we're looking for. Because she's gotten away a little bit, right? She escapes the safe house before the Gestapo knocks on the door, but she gets on this train and it gets radioed into the hey, look, we're looking for a woman of generally this age, and she's going to be headed this. We think she might be headed this direction. They start looking at the trains. The SS see her on the train and they start moving for her to go get her. And she's like, "Oh, I'm in trouble." And so she gets up. She starts moving through the train cars, and they're chasing her through the train cars, which is just very.
And the train's just going very James Bond.
Hauling through France towards Spain, towards freedom, and she's running from train car to train car, and the SS are chasing her. I'm picturing just dudes in big black trench coats with the red armband, moving after her. Very Indiana Jones. And she gets to the back of the train, and there's no more cars, and they're still coming through, and so she jumps from the train.
She jumps
off the train, rolls, pops up, runs into the forest. The Gestapo see her, and I don't know if these guys jump off, but whatever. They start to call in for help, and they send in guys to try to get her. And she's running through the forest to try to escape. And they're shooting at her. They start shooting at her, and then eventually they catch her, and she surrenders. And Nancy Wake is taken in by the Gestapo, and they bring her to the local Gestapo office for questioning. And this is how we say goodbye in Germany level of type of questioning. If we're talking about Indiana Jones. So
is this the end of the White Mouse?
Well, we're going to take one more commercial break, and then we've come back. We are going to find out what happens to Nancy Wake when the Gestapo get their hands on her. It's just, you just got to stick with us on this one. It is 1943, and Nancy Wake has been opposing the Germans for 10 years. First as a journalist, and then on the front lines as an ambulance driver, ferrying troops and ferrying wounded. Then from within as a resistance operative working with the SOE to sabotage and cause havoc from within occupied France. She earns a reputation as the White Mouse and becomes public enemy number one in occupied Germany. She is then, they find out where she is. They start to hunt her down. She escapes via train. There's a foot chase. She is shot at. She's not hit, but they fired upon. She surrenders and is taken in by the Gestapo. They bring her into a Gestapo office and spend 4 days torturing her for information. And she gives them nothing, not even her real name, under probably pretty extreme conditions. We don't know exactly, but the Gestapo are relatively famous for getting people to confess to things that they might not have even done. So
yeah, they were not known for being gentle.
No. They hold her for 4 days. She resists. She doesn't break. And amazingly, she's so convincing in her people skills to resist torture at the hands of the Gestapo that they just eventually let her go free. And they're like, she doesn't know anything. You go. You're not the White Mouse, obviously.
Maybe we got the wrong person. Okay. Okay. So she's smart, good with people skills, tough, and rich.
Yes.
And she's using all of this to resist the Nazis.
Yes. Within a few days of being released, she is sitting in the back of a coal truck crossing the border from France into Spain. And she hops out of the back of that coal truck. She finds that British embassy. She gets on a boat. She sails across the English Channel, which doesn't sound like such a big deal right now, but it was in 1943 when the channel was patrolled by German U-boats and aircraft.
Yeah.
She ends up in London. Okay.
And where's her husband in all this?
Well, her husband, we haven't really talked about him very much. She meets a rich guy and gets married, basically, is the story we have for her with the husband so far. But he is suspected of being involved with the White Mouse. And the Gestapo find him and they torture him and he's executed. Now, she doesn't find this out until after the war's over. And she obviously feels kind of, when she does find out about this, she feels pretty bad about it because she feels like obviously she was responsible for his death. And this is a thing that will stick with her for a long time. But as the war is going on and she's in the middle of this, she doesn't find out. She doesn't know that something has happened to him. She's
in London.
Yes. Yeah. So she makes it to London. And she's brought to the headquarters of the Special Operations Executive, which we've talked about a little bit. And she has talked with over the radio. But now that she's in London and she's getting to see her SOE handlers for the first time.
Yeah. So this was formed from the section of MI6 that was responsible for undercover sabotage. SOE stands for Special Operations Executive. It was created in July 1940. And like you said, Ben, it's all about causing havoc. It's all about undermining Hitler from within his own borders. They've got about 10,000 agents. About a third of them were women, so that's like about 3,000 or more women. Including
Virginia Hall, who we've talked about in a very early episode of the show.
Yeah. So the SOE provides spies, resistance forces with all sorts of things. Forged papers, training, weapons, money, codes, communication equipment, even this newfangled thing called plastic explosives.
Yes, it's just developed around this time period.
Yeah.
Incredibly useful for saboteurs.
Yes, I can imagine, yes. And in addition to information training and spy tech, they also send agents to various places. They send operatives to Yugoslavia to help Tito's partisans. They send operatives to Greece to sabotage railroad lines. They send people to France to arm like 500,000 French resistance fighters in support of the whole D-Day operation. In the Netherlands, they send people to rescue Royal Air Force pilots. And and in addition to all that, they also sent 6 operatives to Vemork, Norway. These operatives parachute in to waist-deep snow, and they find a lab where the Nazis were trying to create stuff leading to a nuclear bomb.
The hard water plant. They were trying to make they were trying to make a nuke in Norway, and the SOE went in there and took them out. They found out about it. Like the SOE was responsible for finding out that that's where the plant was, and then they worked with the Norwegian resistance.
Yeah.
Get some guys in there, like they skied in, and there's a bunch of good stuff. We'll do an episode on that at some point.
Oh, definitely. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this sounds kind of James Bondy, and maybe not surprising because Ian Fleming, the guy who wrote the James Bond novels, was himself attached to SOE.
Yes. And a lot of the James Bond stuff originally comes from that. And when we're talking about Bond, like I was talking about, like Vera Atkins was one of the women who trained Nancy Wake, and she was kind of the senior woman in charge of those 3,000 women operatives you were talking about. She was kind of the head of operations in France and training people in espionage, sabotage, stuff like that. Okay, so it's 1943. Nancy Wake has just barely escaped with her life from the Gestapo trying to kill her. She's public enemy number one. But now she's safe. She's in London, and they're not going to get her, at least anytime in the foreseeable future. So,
why do I get the impression that she doesn't stay quietly in London?
Well, I don't see why women should just wave our men a proud goodbye and then knit them balaclavas.
Okay.
Yes. So she straps on a parachute. She gets into the back of a B-24. And in April 1944, she jumps out of the bomber in the middle of the night and parachutes into central France, carrying a pistol, a radio, and a fat stack of French cash. She has contacts. She has experience. It's the same thing we were talking about with those bomber pilots, right? She was instrumental in getting these fighter and bomber pilots and navigators and instrument guys, machine gunners, all this stuff, getting experienced soldiers out of occupied territory before they're captured, because these people are important. They have important skills and training. And you know who else does? Nancy Wake has important skills and training that cannot be replicated by talking to somebody over the telephone and telling them how to do the job. She knows people. She's good at this stuff. She's not going to just sit there and watch the rest of the war happen. She wants to get back into it. And she's a valuable asset. So in 1944, she parachutes in out of the back of a B-24. It's her first parachute jump. So that's pretty impressive that your first skydiving experience is parachuting into flak at night in occupied France. Yeah. But she does get her parachute does get stuck in a tree because she's parachuting in the dark into the dark. And her parachute gets stuck in a tree and
they have trees in France.
Yes. The resistance have the coordinates on where the jump's going to be. And the French resistance come out to meet the White Mouse and with all the gear that she's carrying, but they find her stuck up in a tree. And you thought, Pat, you were very happy when you read about this part of the story. That you were like, okay, we were talking about, I was like, I was kind of pitching this story to you. And then when you got to this part, you were like, yeah, we got to talk about her.
Yeah. So the French resistance leader sees the White Mouse tangled up in her parachute in the tree. And he says something along the lines of, oh, I wish all trees grew such beautiful fruit. And Nancy Wake responds, probably in perfect French, oh, don't give me that French nonsense.
Don't give me that. Nonsense is a paraphrasing because we're trying to keep the show PG. But she was an excellent swearer from all accounts. But yes, so yeah. Okay, so she ends up with this resistance group and she's trying to coordinate them. But these aren't the same guys that she'd been working with before. They're a new group. And at some point, there's actually like a lot of drama because she's like, well, I got a bunch of cash. I got all this stuff. And like this resistance group that she falls into are like, why don't you just give us the cash and get out of here? Like, and she's like, I think I might be getting robbed right now. And so there becomes a little bit of drama. She calls SOE. She gets redeployed to a different group. Everything gets diffused. She ends up with somebody else. But
like we said, the Maquis, the resistance, there's a lot of variation among the different groups under that umbrella.
Yes. So she falls in with this other group that is a little bit more civilized, and immediately she impresses them all by her ability to like outswear and outdrink everybody in the group and probably outfight them too. Okay. So now she's embedded with this Maquis cell in France, and it's 1944. And what the resistance is doing up to this point, and you had talked about this huge uprising of like 500,000 people in Paris. And this is kind of the time of D-Day. D-Day is about to happen. And the message coming out of London and the US, SOE, we've talked about it a few times, but SOE ends up becoming, British intelligence and also the CIA. Like all of that is kind of traces its source back to SOE. And the message coming from SOE right now is like, we are going to land a humongous force of soldiers in Normandy in June of 1944. When that happens, we need you guys to cause as much chaos and destruction as you can back behind enemy lines so that they can't just take every soldier and tank and train and truck that they have in all of the Western Hemisphere and throw it directly at the beaches on D-Day, or at the Normandy beachhead, right? You need to cause trouble so that we can do this.
Okay, so what sort of trouble did they cause?
Oh, they cause all kinds of trouble. So they start leading guerrilla attacks on Nazi supply depots. They're blowing up rail stations. They attack communications facilities. They get coordinates of people that they think are Gestapo agents, and they go and get these guys, right? And they arrest them, or they capture them, or whatever. They destroy their communications equipment. They cut train tracks. They raid depots. They sabotage factories. They perform general espionage and sabotage missions against the enemy. This is where we get the story that she kills on one of these missions. Nancy Wake kills a German guard with her bare hands. Whoa! Like we said, that story comes from her own biography, and it's a judo chop like Captain Kirk, which, if true, is awesome.
Yes.
I am 100% ready to believe that story is true, and I am accepting it at face value, because why would she lie to us? And it's awesome. Love the idea of just some tough, hard drinking Aussie just karate chopping German sentry unconscious. And it makes me happy. It's a thing that makes me happy. Okay. The cell that she's in is a part of an attack on the local Gestapo headquarters in the town of Montluçon. How do you say this?
Montluçon.
Montluçon. We have established at various points throughout the history of this podcast that Pat is the certified French pronunciator, and that my French is just hilariously bad at all fronts.
Your French is great.
I have a little bit of American accent in my French. Speaking with a little bit of American accent.
Yeah. Okay. So Nancy Wake and some Maquis roll up to the Gestapo headquarters in this town. Yes,
and this is kind of the center of the counterintelligence there and the opposition to the resistance. They roll up on it with machine guns and grenades, and they shoot the place up. 38 members of the Gestapo are killed, and several others are captured, and Nancy Wake is responsible for interrogating many of these captured guys. She's good at talking to people, and she can be intimidating, and she's surrounded by people with guns. So that helps. Maybe sometimes she uses finesse, maybe sometimes it's intimidation, but she's able to get good information out of people that she captures. And that's a thing that will come up throughout the rest of the war. When she gets her hands on enemy agents, she's able to get them to talk to her one way or the other.
That's useful.
Yes. And so then she starts coordinating Allied supply drops. She starts distributing weapons. At one point, though, there's kind of, things are going pretty well. There's a lot of chaos and havoc happening that is disrupting German operations and making it so that the D-Day landings are going to be a little bit easier than they would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
Now, D-Day happens, and the Allies have established a beachhead, and one day Nancy and her cell gets word that, like, hey, we've got this beachhead. It's a little tenuous. We're trying to break out. We're trying to get as many troops on the beach as possible, but there is a bit of a hiccup, and that hiccup is the second SS Panzer Division, which is
that's a hiccup,
which is the elite, one of the elite armored units of the German military, happens to be stationed in the middle of France, and they are on the move north to oppose the D-Day landings, and that's a problem. And Nancy Wake and her Maquis cell get the word to do whatever you can to delay them. And the second SS Panzer Division is equipped with like 500 Tiger tanks and Panther tanks and stuff. So like this serious stuff. It's like, what can you do? What can we do? I don't know. We can blow up the road. Maybe they can't drive on the road if we blow it up. Maybe we can blow up a fuel depot so they can't refuel the tanks. You're not going to fight these guys. You're not going to fight the tanks. You're not going to fight these people. But there's things you can maybe do to help disrupt their operations and their logistics. Just slow them down. You just need to buy us a day or two. All right. So they try. They attack a base of the Second SS, and it doesn't go well. The battle is lost for the Maquis, and she finds herself in a truck at one point that is kind of leaving the battlefield, and it gets strafed by a German dive bomber. A Stuka attacks the truck that she's driving in. And it blows up the radio that she was using to communicate that, like, hey, this, here's how many guys. Yeah, she's got some info. She's got some intel to relay. Like, here's how many guys there are. Here's where they are exactly. They were actually like, we were attacking what we thought was a rear area, but there's way more of them than there were. Like, I got info, but the truck she's in and she's like relaying the information. The truck gets strafed, gets blown up. She gets knocked out of it. And the radio's destroyed.
Eek. So what does she do?
Well, what would you do?
Well, if I were Nancy Wake, I'd try my very best to get another radio so I can keep transmitting this information. But where do you find one?
Yeah, she's got critical information. She needs to relay it. Okay, well, hard to know where to find it. She knows where there is a radio, but it's far away. So what she does is she steals a bicycle from some French person and rides it 125 miles in 72 hours to hook up with another Maquis cell that she knows where they are, and uses their radio.
And she knows that they have a radio.
Yes, and she uses their radio to radio into London to let them know what's going on. Okay. There's another story that comes up where they're fighting, and the section leader of her squad is killed, and she has to kind of take over and coordinate the withdrawal from she's kind of like in the middle of it, kind of coordinating withdrawal while they're still fighting this second SS. Sending the resistance to fight the SS Panzer divisions is not a winning strategy, but they did what they could, and they slowed down the assault as much as they could. As we know now, the D-Day landings are a success. The Allies liberate France. They win World War II, and the war ends. And once the Allies sweep through Paris and liberate Paris, the entire city basically revolts on the same day as the Allies are approaching. The entire city, like that's the 500,000 you were talking about, 500,000 people in Paris, basically rise up and overthrow the German government, and they flee, and France is liberated. That's kind of the end of the war for Nancy Wake. She doesn't, proceed forward after that, because all of her contacts and all of her specialized training and experience was in coordinating French resistance. And once France is liberated, that's kind of the end of the war for her. Okay, so the war ends, and it's time to hand out all the medals. And Nancy Wake finds herself the most decorated Allied woman of World War II. Not just by all women who participated in World War II. She is the most decorated person. She gets the British George Medal, the American Medal of Freedom, the French Legion d'Honneur, 3 Croix de Guerre, which are like awards for bravery in combat, by the French government. She's made a member of the Order of Australia. She's given a medal in New Zealand. New Zealand names a street after her, right? Like, she becomes this very, well-recognized, well-known, heroine of the war. But this is Nancy Wake, and she didn't do it for awards and medals and recognition and any of that. She kind of felt compelled from the very first time she said hello to Adolf Hitler that she didn't want to be a part of this. She wanted to aid the Allied cause, and she wanted to liberate her homeland. And she lost her husband in this war. This was a serious, and she lost probably a lot of friends and a lot of compatriots and a lot of resistance allies. Those fights against the Second SS were extremely damaging to her cell, and she lost a lot of people. Yeah. She didn't want, the point wasn't to get a big medal and to get on the front page of a newspaper. So when she got those medals, she sold them almost immediately. She was like, I don't need this. I'm going to sell it. So she sold it. And it's not like she needed the money because she was rich. And so somebody asked her about it, and they're like, why would you sell all these medals? You're this great hero, and you got all those medals, and you just sold them right away, and you didn't need the money. And she said, in very typical Nancy Wake fashion, there's no point in keeping them. I'll probably go to hell, and they'll melt there anyways.
That's good.
And we do have to imagine her saying all of these quotes with an Australian accent, which I cannot reproduce. But it just makes it fun. It makes all the jokes funnier. I feel like. Anyway, she lives to be having survived Gestapo interrogation and shootouts with the 2nd SS Panzer Division. She still lives to be 98 years old. And she finally passed away in 2011.
Wow.
So that's
Nancy Wake.
Yes.
Yeah, Nancy Wake, the white mouse.
The white mouse. What was it? The little vermin. They're the little creature that's like hard to eradicate.
Yeah.
That's what she was. She was a thorn in the Gestapo side, counterintelligence for the entirety of World War II and a little bit before. And the most decorated Allied woman of World War II. So that's her story. And she might have judo chopped the guy to death, which would be awesome.
She might have.
That's another Star Wars. There's Star Trek thing that we were talking about. We were doing the Deep Space Nine thing, but yeah, that's a very Vulcan death pinch maneuver. I like it. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening to our episode. We really enjoy doing these, and we hope that you guys enjoy listening to them as much as we enjoy making them. We appreciate you guys being here, and we look forward to seeing you again next week with another badass. Thank you so much.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badaasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.